So it's a question of where does the growth come from and how sustainable is that. And as I said, the second thing is, if you now would sort of say that this is fine and we have growth back, and we need to actually restrain the growth in some form or other, I mean taxes or some other thing, is that then you sort of cement the same problems we had in the last 10 years. You just wouldn't deal with at all with the structural issues in the economy. And of course, I mean, I don't think the structural issue is a road to Riga, but the structural issue is to widen the export base. And we're never going to be a manufacturing exporter. We have to be a services exporter. So where are our services? Many of these tend to be around, now we are around tourism that we can export. It's almost the only thing we export in services, tourism. So we have to sort of build from there. And there is little money poured into this kind of restructuring of the economy. Now, on the other hand, of course, you have to say that Estonia is running a very high hidden deficit spending anyway, I mean, which is EU structural funding. It is not, in that sense, our own money. It's already hidden deficit spending. We just don't have to pay for that. But, I mean, we can lecture others that they should do the same, I mean, austerity measures and all that, while we actually have a hidden deficit spending. So I think it's, as I said, you used it's a very nice way of putting down the sort of the structural issues and say that structural issues take care of themselves. Well, they never do. I mean, so you just get an imbalances that get worse over time, and then you have boom and bust cycle. And of course, you never get out of these boom and bust cycles altogether, but you somehow need to alleviate them. And we still don't have any counter-cyclical measures in Estonia, and even the surpluses. I don't think they actually worked as a counter-cyclical measure even before in the build-up. And very few things that the central bank could have done in the build-up to the crisis was also almost impossible to do because the banking sector wasn't our own. So the central bank even couldn't regulate the banking sector. So it's and from that actually it leads to the question about resilience. So it's one thing is of course the financial regulation and prudential, all these issues, and this is something that I guess there is a lot of debate in Europe. There is a lot of debate around orthodox economist networks, if you will, whether to have some sort of capital movement tax or whatever, and you have all these things. But of course, these issues go back to a global imbalances that we haven't really discussed at all. And this is all how much the global south and global north are actually interdependent. There's a lot of sort of subsidizing of the global north by the south and all that, which is not really been our discussion. So I don't think we need to or want to go into that as of yet, maybe here. But in terms of, if you look at Estonia, obviously the one thing you have to do is to make your domestic economy stronger. I mean, and then there is not much being done on that front. I mean, even if you look at spending on R&D, spending on science, spending on whatever you want to have, this is very much done, first of all, via the European structural funding, and this is substituting local expenditure. This is not actually addition to that. So in the last 10 years or so, this is so we use, in a way, the European structural funding, as I said, to have this hidden deficit spending. So, but how do you make the economy more resilient in terms of making the domestic economy stronger? Of course, is you have to, as I said, concentrate on sort of domestic linkages in the economy. And Estonia, as also the other Baltic economies, and also the European periphery, maybe except Ireland, will never be in manufacturing hubs anymore. I mean, this is not coming back, and these economies cannot really compete with China or other Asian economies in terms of just having a lot of manufacturing jobs. I mean, so all these one breadwinner families and all these social models need to somehow change in reaction to this. And this, I guess, is something that the European Union is not really addressing at all. I mean, you, Karsten, you actually mentioned the competitiveness pact, but if you look into that competitiveness pact, there's a lot that has to do with sort of relaxing labor markets and all of these things. There is actually relatively little about the sort of the restructuring of these economies. And I think this is perhaps one of the key missing perspectives on the European periphery, is the sort of Schumpeterian view on these economies. and to understand, where did they innovate and why do they innovate, and whether they innovate at all. And so this is something we can discuss maybe later. But so this was my reaction to your deficit or not deficit spending.
Would you like to comment a bit on that, on structural funds?
I like that you point out the structural funds.
Yeah.
There are some of us who argue that the Greek crisis came because of the structural funds.
Right.
Greece has become addicted to structural funds. That has made the Greeks used to getting pensions and whatever. They have built up entitlements, and on the other hand, they did not have to pay taxes. And it worked very, very well for many, many years. Then came the East European enlargement, then the subsidies to Greece were cut, but then the interest rate fell because of the Eurozone membership. And when these two effects were sort of fading out, we have the crisis. So I should say, by the way, that as I understand it, there's substantial awareness among policymakers in Estonia that this is like, alcohol or cigarettes or heroin or whatever. It's good to get a little bit of it, but we have to be a little bit careful that the long-term effects are not too crazy. There was this issue about that SD Bank could not do anything, and this is by and large right. But I would say that SD Bank has done something for financial stability in Estonia, because in 2007, the end of the year, the financial stability, so in every central bank you have the monetary policy being run and you have the financial stability wing. And the financial stability wings from all Nordic and Baltic central banks, they met in Tallinn in November 2007. And they went straight into the best hotel we have in town, Hotel Telegraph. They got the best dinners, the best red wine, no questions asked. The whole thing was we wanted to impress these guys so that when things went belly up here, they would have a positive impression of their stay in Tallinn. And it was nice. It was nice weather and everything, so it was a great success, I think.
Okay, so you did something. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, let's take a question.
Yeah. I'm a student here. Question to Jeffrey and Rainer. I'm writing a paper about electricity consumption of energy-intensive industries, and I totally buy your premise that we need to develop industrial policy in Baltic countries. And I discovered through this particular paper I'm writing that there is particular one industry, like forest industry, that could develop well in Latvia and Estonia, and we're still exporting a significant share of the wood without any processing, which leaves the jobs out and stuff like that. So my question is whether you, both of you, have developed some papers regarding particular solutions for this or any other industry, how the state could actually help, what he could do. That would be also in line with state aid directives of the European Union, and which would make sense in short and long term.
I think if you, I can just go first. I mean, I would suggest what you should look at. I think there was in 2008 or 9. There was a paper done actually by the Riigikantselei, the State's Chancellery, and I think they almost accidentally stumbled into. It was about export industries and what they can do, and they sort of stumbled into the backward linkages idea. That you look at how you develop, as you're saying, in forestry, we mainly export right now lumber, and it just goes up. And they said, I mean, you should try to tie the aid they get from the government or the structural funding to developing also the backward linkages. So they develop suppliers and these things, and you try to set up a new company that maybe deals with design and all this. So this is I can tell you that this is probably a nice inroad in terms of finding work done by the Estonian government actually, that even takes into account these aspects. So this is probably the first you can look and say that they even did some calculations, I understand. But this was very quickly dropped because somehow I think they discovered that this is too much industrial policy, and so there was no capacity to actually really do that. But there's a quite nice ideas that I think it was exporting industries, some round table or something like that. But otherwise, there are of course quite some papers around that deal with these issues. How do you develop them? And of course, then you have to sort of translate them into local, as you said, European aid context. But one thing, of course, that is hardly ever regulated by state aid, either in World Trade Organization, the EU, is R&D. So you can always give R&D. You can always call anything R&D and support that. But this is because it can always be also very heavily on the side, not on research side, but it can also be heavily on development side. So you can always do that.
Just in terms of writing it up, I took a quick stab at it with this report that I produced with some colleagues called Latvia Renewed. I just happen to have it here. It's on sale. You can give me cash. No, but it's downloadable. There's a free PDF file, and you can take a look at it at this political party, Saskaņas centers in Latvia, who I'm not affiliated with, but a few people in their party have asked me to produce a report, which I did with Michael Hudson and Terry Dwyer. We begin to address some of those issues. The timber question in particular, of course, is probably the most relevant one for Latvia, given that half of the forests in the country are still state-owned. So it provides some mobility and maneuvering room for the state to get involved in that sector. The Swedes have been promising the Latvians for 20 years now that they're going to put in paper production facilities in Latvia. They haven't done it. And other timber processing. Some timber processing, of course, is occurring. But if you speak with people in the Latvian Foreign Ministry, they will tell you about their frustration with the Swedes and their promises and the lack of delivery on those promises. So at some point, you need to begin instituting requirements and contractual agreements for having access to this timber and putting in some value-added production. Of course, you can't make demands which are too high, but I think you can more successfully negotiate with your partners in a way which does result in that kind of infrastructure being put in place. Agriculture is another area. One of the kind of niches that Latvia is discovering is in the production of high-quality wheat seed. Seed that will produce high gluten content wheat, which especially in Ukraine is absent. The gluten content of the wheat is very, very poor. And so you have some farmers who are beginning to do this, but the state could take a role in terms of encouraging other farmers to begin taking this up. And they could organize agricultural rings, in other words, the sharing of agricultural equipment, such as you see in Denmark, Sweden, and in Germany. You have to get over the obstacle of people's distrust of anything that suggests cooperation and a return to coal hoses. But if you can do that, then you'll be fine.